we come now to the 10-minute rule motion, Laura Sands. We're grateful.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring a bill to require private landlords to ensure that any property they let meets the requirements of the Decent Home Standard and for connected purposes. This bill aims to expect all landlords to comply with the Decent Home Standards, those standards that we already demand of council-owned and housing association properties. I find it very strange that we demand high standards for those properties owned by local authorities and housing associations, and that we don't have the same standards for those families who rent from the private landlords. Why the difference? We can't continue distinguishing between tenure, ownership, or lobby when setting the standards we expect of the homes in which our families, our pensioners, our friends and family live. Why would we discriminate against some tenants merely on the basis of who owns that property, not who lives in that property? And let's be frank, the requirements of Decent Home Standards are not particularly onerous or unreasonable. They're actually just, as they say, of decency. They must meet the current minimum safety standards for housing. Well, that's not exactly revolutionary. They must be in a reasonable state of repair. Again, is this a particularly unreasonable expectation, particularly when we've got families who are there on low incomes with lack of ability, necessarily the finance, to do their own repairs? It must have reasonable and modern facilities and services. I'm shocked in some of the properties that I go into in my constituency where they do not have cookers, they only have microwaves, which captures those families in expensive food, lack of resilience, lack of choice. And I do not believe that we should be allowing families to have to live with those sorts of facilities in those properties. Frequently, when we as the community, as society, are supporting and paying those landlords to house those tenants. It must also provide a reasonable degree of thermal comfort, efficient heating and effective insulation in normal parlance. Why should those who rent privately have any different level of comfort, or more importantly have to pay double what council tenants pay for the same level of heat? Because it's a perverse situation that we set up elaborate government schemes to get better energy efficiency, when improvements to the standard of housing itself would help those in greater fuel poverty. Because let's be frank, it's not the people who leak energy, it's the homes that are badly insulated. I represent one of the poorest wards in the United Kingdom, and I'm passionate about housing because it is actually at the heart of many of the problems faced by my community. In one ward, I have 84% privately rented accommodation, and this creates fundamental challenges. I have some very good landlords, I have some very bad landlords. Some landlords are making 14% return on investment year on year off the back of housing benefit and are not reinvesting that money into these properties. In some properties, I'm sure many colleagues, many members in this House have the same experience. Before you get to the door, you can smell the deprivation. You can smell the damp. You can see by the common parts that these properties are not at proper standards for places that you or I would feel fit to live in. The lack of proper ventilation, care and attention, unsafe for children or the elderly. Do we not think that everyone deserves a place of security that can even, on a temporary basis, be called home? You can feel the drafts driving through flats that are impossible to heat due to rotten windows. You can see the mould in kitchens, wallpaper coming off the walls. These are unfit properties and they create a much greater turnover of tenants, undermining community cohesion, disrupting children's education, breaking links with support services that are so important to many families, and eroding any sense of permanency for these families to put down roots. Furthermore, some of my elderly constituents find some of these landlords intimidating and will restrict themselves from actually making a case for repairs or better insulation. And I'm sure, again, many people in this House, many members in this House have done that, made representation on behalf of people to landlords, if you can find them. And even councils are confused about the standards needed, with some landlords happy to test enforcement standards in court and often play what I call legal chicken with the council. Why are we putting up with all this displacement activity to try and establish decent homes for decent people when a clear standard would create a much more transparent and fair set of expectations on all sides? The housing crisis is a staple part of today's political lexicon, but it is crucial to remember and to highlight that the housing crisis we face for many is a qualitative one as well as a quantitative one. And it is now time for us to start setting the standard for the tenant rather than on the basis of ownership. So let us look at the quality as well as the quantity of our nation's housing, because all families, wherever they live, under whatever tenure that they are occupying a home, deserve decent homes.
Order. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in her bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Dr. Julian Huppert, Mr. Mark Prisk, Mr. Stuart Jackson, Mr. Andrew Love, Mark Pawsey, Bob Blackman, Mr. Jim Cunningham, Mrs. Cheryl Gillan, Caroline Lucas, Stephen Gilbert.
And yourself.
And myself.
Laura Sands.
Private rented sector decent home standard bill.
Second reading what day?
6th of March.
The 6th of March. Thank you. Order. We come now to...